have on the spot reports by Bill Donovan and other WJMW King Country reporters as the evening goes on at 5. Yes, here's Bill Donovan right now.
Right, Mike, we're on the Stewart Road right now, just the opposite side of Lawson's Trailer Court. We have a couple of houses demolished. We are now in a house where a wrecker is going to be used to pull some people out. We have, it looks like, another house here demolished. Let's see. Yes, it is a house completely torn down here. A wrecker is being taken on down where some men are being pulled.
This not only was one of the worst tornado outbreaks of all time, but also some of the worst storms experienced by people in living memory. So many communities were struck by these storms, but Tanner, Alabama was wiped off the map when the following events occurred. First, I'll summarize the build-up to the 1974 super outbreak, and since it's the same information, I'm just going to grab my Xenia script and summarize what I had there. If you've seen that video, this is going to sound familiar, but it was the same storm. To start, on April 1st, 1974, there was a powerful low-pressure system developing across the interior plains of North America throughout the day. The storm was only further intensified by a surge of highly moist air merging with it as it moved into the Mississippi and Ohio Valley areas, and the result was a clash of warm and cold air on opposite sides of the storm. A surge of warm, moist air came up from the Gulf of Mexico and essentially covered the states that would be struck by the tornadoes in a blanket of warm, humid air. NOAA and the National Weather Service forecasted severe weather to strike on April 3rd, but no one could have predicted what happened next. April 3rd had at least one tornado before the actual outbreak occurred, and this was in Indiana. But as the day dawned and carried on, severe weather watches and warnings were going out from across the Great Lakes and down into the southern states. The Indiana tornado was just the prelude to the show because the actual outbreak was about to kick off. As I covered in the Xenia tornado video, Ohio was about to get decimated. Indiana would also be struck by an F5 first, but Ohio was going to be raked over the coals by more than one. This system moved to the east, however the Midwest was not the only area that was going to get raked over the fire by F5s. Shifting our attention down to the southern states, let's take a look at Alabama. Alabama was going to get its fair share of F5s that day, more than so even. Ewan was going to be hit by one, but that's a topic for a later video. Tanner, Alabama, meanwhile, was going to be hit by two, one after the other, less than an hour apart. Let me say that again. 2 F5s struck this town less than an hour apart. Less than 45 minutes even. Some accounts I read about this said that the time ranged between 30 to 45 minutes between the two tornadoes, but most of them have it as little as 30 minutes between the two tornadoes. And these weren't twin tornadoes or one tornado with a satellite. These were two independent F5s that happened to pinpoint the same town. One is bad enough, but a town being struck double like this is catastrophic on a whole other level. And this is the story we're covering today. As the storms to the north began to move across the Ohio Valley, another series of strong storms developed to the south of them, east of the Mississippi River. Now, unlike the Natchez tornado where it dropped on essentially and then followed the Mississippi River, nothing like that would happen with these storms, but they'd be just as intense in their own way. I mean, look at this picture. That's a bathtub that was embedded into the ground by the force that the first Tanner tornado threw it. I'll come back to this picture later, keep it in mind. So the first of the tornadoes formed at around 6:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, or CDT. It touched down in Lawrence County, Alabama, and this one would not end for an hour and 13 minutes. This tornado would kill 28 people and injure 267, but onto the details of what it did in Tanner. When the tornado first touched down, the 5th F5 of the outbreak already, it was near the unincorporated community Mount Hope, which first appeared on maps back in 1880. And this may not be the last time we hear about this town, because it would be struck again by a rather infamous tornado in 2011, the Hackleburg Phil Campbell tornado, one that I will be talking about later this year. Once the first tornado was on the ground, it tracked towards and through a few more small communities. It intensified rapidly and grew in strength, sweeping up buildings, blowing down homes, and throwing vehicles that were attempting to drive away from it. A family of 6 were killed when their vehicle was thrown. Near the city of Moulton, more homes were swept away by the tornado. In fact, a water pump was lifted clear out of the ground near State Road 157. So the ending of Twister? Yeah, don't try that. After tearing apart more rural communities in Morgan County, the tornado crossed the Tennessee River into Limestone County. It actually became a waterspout as it crossed the river. Then, it grew into a 3/4 of a mile wide wedge. It scoured the ground and dug up the reddish soil, leaving behind what must have looked like a trail of blood. It even painted the trees that weren't knocked over with this red soil. And then it finally reached and tore through Tanner. Homes were completely swept away, vehicles were tossed, trees were debarked, businesses were destroyed, and Lawson's trailer park sustained severe damage. Once it tore through the community, the tornado then continued out of Tanner, leaving a path of cleaved wreckage and twisted ruin through the town behind it. Then it moved into the unincorporated communities Capshaw and Harvest. Both populated and rural areas were decimated. Trees were ripped up and leveled. Homes were destroyed and completely swept off their foundations, and the remnants were scattered over a wide area. Structures were crumpled, smashed, and obliterated in about every way you can imagine. This was the area that the bathtub I showed a picture of from earlier was found, embedded into the ground by the sheer force that the tornado threw it. This came from a home in Harvest and was thrown so hard by the tornado that it was embedded in the ground. The F5, as I said, was on the ground for 73 minutes, carving a path of destruction with the ease of a hot knife cutting through butter across the countryside, before finally dying after passing Harvest, leaving 28 people dead behind it, and as I said, it injured over 250. Its peak width was 500 yards wide, and it was on the ground for 52 miles. One such family who had their lives forever changed by the tornado were the McLaughlin family, who had been preparing to celebrate the birthday of 2-year-old Walter McLaughlin Jr. when the tornado struck their home on Ingram Road in Tanner. Their chimney collapsed due to the winds of the tornado, killing young Walter, his mother, Hetty Ruth, and 5-year-old sister, Sandra. Walter Sr. was not home. He had been called out by the utility company he worked for to repair some damage on some downed power lines, unaware of what had happened back at his home. I got in my truck and went on back. I didn't think it would take long, he said. As with any tornado's immediate aftermath, first responders reached the destroyed section of Tanner, launching an immediate rescue effort to help find survivors and help those who had been hit by the tornado. While the rescue efforts were ongoing, people were still trapped in their homes and being dug out of the debris by rescuers. People looked up and saw a second tornado bearing down on them, coming out of the darkness, catching many first responders and other rescuers by surprise. The nightmare had just begun all over again. The second F5 formed just over an hour after the original had first dropped, and it roared into Tanner like a monster coming out of the darkness, hitting between 30 and 45 minutes after the first tornado had ripped through it. This one would be on the ground for 90 minutes, would be a killer like the first, killing 16 people, and it would injure 190. Like the first, it would have a peak width of 500 yards wide. The first town this second F5 hit was Tanner. What homes and other structures in Tanner that were left standing after the first tornado were not spared this time and were flattened by the second as it tore its own path through the community. Walter McLaughlin Sr. saw this one, unaware that the first had struck his home. He immediately raced home, and when he got back after the second tornado had moved through, he found the house destroyed, and only silence answered him when he called out. I was shook up and in shock. They made me get in the truck, he said, when he was told that his wife, 6-year-old and 2-year-old children were dead. 2 of his daughters, however, survived the tornado. He called them the 2 angels who saved him from the brink. One man who had survived the first tornado when it hit the trailer park I mentioned earlier had been rescued already and taken to a nearby church, which was then hit by the second tornado. It collapsed on him and killed him. Once the second tornado tore through Tanner and leveled what little was left of the town, it raced across Limestone County and into Madison County. Capshaw and Harvest were also again hit. This tornado left Alabama and entered Tennessee, where it did major damage and left 6 dead in Franklin and Lincoln counties, before this tornado died in Coffee County. Bill Donovan gave a live radio report from the scene in the immediate aftermath. I played some of it at the start of the video, and some of his quotes from throughout the whole thing describing the scene were the following, spoken right outside of Lawson's trailer court. "We have some houses demolished. We are now at a house where a wrecker is going to be used to pull some people out. A wrecker is being taken down to where some men are being told are supposedly trapped in a chimney. A car was completely carried across this field. Where it came from, we don't know. We know it came from somewhere on the opposite side of this cotton field. Would you look at the trees? It's unreal. Trees are everywhere. Man, sawed off about 18 feet above the ground. Big pine trees, a foot or a foot and a half in diameter. Here's a couple trees, 2 feet in diameter, just sawed off and lying all over the ground." The full audio of his report on scene is linked in the description if you want to listen to all of it. It's worth giving a listen to. The second tornado destroyed over 1,000 homes, killed 16 people in total, 2 of whom died when the church they were in was destroyed amid a worship service. The second tornado was on the ground for 98 miles. And between these 2 F5s, a total of 44 people were killed. And all across the Midwest, more F5s had, and already were striking and killing many more people. Over 300 would die that day from the tornadoes. Survivors from Tanner commented on the roar of the tornadoes. They were described as deafening. Tracy Doty Ward shared her memories of that day 50 years later. She said that, "By the time we got home, the sky was green. Our neighbors were out of town, but we stayed all night in their basement. Fortunately, our house was spared, but we lived 3 miles from Tanner. We had a good friend who was in the National Guard, and we found a baby in the mud, without a scratch but miles from his house." Another survivor of the outbreak in northern Alabama commented that he remembered seeing a transmission tower bent over like a pretzel. Tanner and Harvest were perhaps hit the hardest by these 2 tornadoes. The damage they left in both towns, by the time both had torn through, was near total. Multiple hospitals in the area were overflowing with the wounded to the point they had to turn people away. And another F5 would strike Guin, Alabama later in the night as well. That one will get a video down the line, as it is more than deserving of one. But that tornado was also a killer. But over half of the 77 deaths in Alabama that occurred in the 1974 super outbreak occurred because of the 2 F5 tornadoes that pinpointed Tanner. In the aftermath of both tornadoes, the governor of Alabama visited Tanner. Wheelchair-bound from an assassination attempt, pictures show him surrounded by families who had lost everything. Walter McLaughlin Sr., his surviving children, Nancy and Grace, all have a memorial to visit in Limestone County for their family and all of those who were killed by the tornadoes in the 1974 outbreak, the 2011 outbreak, and all tornadoes in the history of Limestone County as a whole. They are not the only family with such pilgrimages either to the site of the outbreak. Walter Sr. has said of his wife and children, "They need to be remembered. I'd like for them to be remembered." In the days immediately after the outbreak, Someone found a picture of Walter Jr. in the rubble of the family home and gave it to his father. It is the only surviving photo he has of his son. Today, he keeps it on a shelf in the family's rebuilt home in Tanner. He still visits the graves of his family who died in the tornado, and he cleans the leaves off the stones of his children who died. His rebuilt family home in Tanner was struck again by another infamous tornado decades later, but this time the house survived. In 1974, I was a freshman at what was then Calhoun Junior College. A lot of the storm damage back then was north of here on Highway 31 in Tanner. Bobby Shuckcoworth said in a 2012 interview, she was living with her parents when the tornado struck Tanner. In 1974, we had 2 large tornadoes and then 2 or 3 smaller tornadoes. We had 18 deaths. The tracks, they're almost on top of each other. The director of the Emergency Management Agency in Limestone County said in the same 2012 interview that Bobby told her story in. In the years since, and even at the time, some meteorologists have and did argue if the second Tanner F5 would actually have been an F4, but officially, it is still rated as an F5 to this day by the National Weather Service. There is no debate on the rating of the first one, however. And both were powerful killer tornadoes still at the end of the day. And they would not be the last tornadoes of such strength to hit Tanner and Harvest either. The towns did rebuild, but history would repeat itself in a nightmarish way 37 years later. Here you can see the radar image of that tornado as it bore down on Tanner at F5 strength when it hit, and it would destroy the town all over again, while many, still living there, likely remembered the tornadoes from decades before, and it had to have been a nightmarish experience and, no doubt, brought up memories for some of the outbreak in 1974 and the 2 F5s that hit back then. And here is a picture of the 2011 tornado that hit Tanner. One you might recognize as I've used it several times. This is the one that struck the rebuilt McLaughlin home in 2011. Consider this ending a teaser for when I talk about the infamous EF5 Hackleburg Phil Campbell tornado later this year, which, yes, destroyed Tanner once again. Another monster absolutely due and deserving a video of its own. For now, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. It tells me you did, that you want to see more like it, and it helps me grow. And thank you for watching. Have a good one, everyone.